I hope those of you that were at the last session enjoyed it and have had time to have a cup of tea in between. Okay, so with a view to kind of keeping on track, because I know we might be tight on time today, I'm going to get started. So thank you everyone for joining. I'm really delighted to have you all here, both the panellists, the chair, and everyone in the audience. As you will all know, ROSA exists to increase funding into the women and girls sector, and one of the ways that we do that is to help build connections between funders of women's organisations. And with that in mind, I'm really delighted to have this amazing panel of funders with us today, all of whom are huge supporters of the women and girls sector. So this session is an opportunity for women and girls organisations to find out a bit more about all of the funders that are here with us today, but it's also a chance for us all to come together as funders and as organisations that need funding to think about how funders can best serve the women and girls sector. So as well as an opportunity for the audience to learn about the funders that are here, it's also an opportunity for us as funders to listen to you. So with that in mind, please do use the question and answer box down at the bottom to pose any questions to the panel. We will have time at the end for that. They could be questions or they could just be discussion topics. That's absolutely fine. And please do use the chat box to introduce yourselves to each other and kind of connect. I know it doesn't feel like we're all in the same space because we can't all see each other. So that's a nice opportunity to make some connections in the chat box. But it goes without saying, please do be considerate in that space. So like I said, we'll have a 5-minute break in the middle and then some time for discussion, but without further ado, I should hand over to Rina, our chair. Rina is portfolio manager at Comic Relief and is currently leading their supporting and sustaining specialism grants programme. Comic Relief are enormous supporters of the women and girls sector, and Rina, it's a huge pleasure to have you here chairing today. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Anna, and thank you for letting me be a part of this session today and to be able to host it. I'm really excited we're here with you all, albeit virtually, but to be in the same space, to be able to have a conversation about what we're all really trying to do, which is increase the investment in the women and girls sector. So I hope you find this session informative. I hope you find it transparent. But also thought-provoking to hear from ourselves as those that work in the organisations that invest in organisations like yourselves, but also for us to have an opportunity to hear from you directly. So what I'll do first is I will just introduce the amazing panel of speakers that we have lined up for today, and then I will tell you a little bit more about myself. So what I might do is, as I call out each of your names, panellists, would you mind giving the audience a wave? I know that they can see your name written down, but it'd be really nice to give a wave or some kind of indication of who you are. So first and foremost, we have Rowan Miller, and Rowan is the head of regional funding in the Southwest over at the National Lottery Community Fund. Rowan is someone that I know is really well connected across the country, especially up where she is in, or down where she is in the Southwest. So a familiar face, I'm sure. We also have Ihsaan Budaly, who's the Grant Support Officer over at the Tudor Trust. So thanks for being with us here today, Ihsaan. Really lucky to have Genevieve Ford-Saville here, who's the Grants Manager over at the Henry Smith charity. And then we have Jack Abbotts, who is our grants officer over at the Clothworkers Foundation. And last but surely not least, we've got Elizabeth Myers, who's our senior policy and grants manager over at the Tampon Tax Fund at the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. So we have 5 speakers who are going to have some time to talk us through the type of work that they do in the organisation that they represent and are a part of, and the work that they're doing in the space of supporting women and girls, specifically in the sector that we're all working in here. So thank you all for joining us. As Anna said before, we really encourage your participation using the chat box to post your questions, your comments, your queries, and I'll do my very best to be able to answer these with the panellists as we get through the session towards the second half. I know it's been a really, really difficult year and almost 15 months to 18 months that we've all experienced, and having this space that Rose has created to come together is incredibly important. We know that the global pandemic has had an impact across the world on individuals, on communities, on families. And what we also know about the impact is that it has had on women and girls specifically. We know the term, the shadow pandemic, has been coined by the United Nations. And what we're all here, I guess, trying to do is bring us all together to talk about how we invest further in this sector. We know that the organisations that support women and girls have experienced an increase in service demand over this last year and more, and also it's an underfunded sector. It's a sector that's understaffed, especially in the buy and for sector, I know, and we know that the impact on staff well-being and on workers in the sector has been really detrimental over this last year. So it's really important just to note those things. What we want to be able to do is obviously create a space for open dialogue around how we work as funders in charitable trusts and organisations and foundations, to be able to work better in partnership with yourselves in organisations who may be applying for funding. As you all may know, Comic Relief is an organisation that started in the mid-1980s. We work in 15 countries, including all across the United Kingdom, and it's all about creating a just world free from poverty. And we do this by driving positive change. We're all about, I guess, investing in organisations that really fit within our social impact strategy. And what we try to do is invest in 4 different parts of this strategy that we've identified. So we want to ensure that children have the best start in life. We want to make sure there are safe spaces for people to live within and to reside within. We want to invest in individuals, communities' mental health, and also to invest in violence against women and girls, and really that gender justice, to be able to achieve gender justice. And that's the portfolio that I currently lead on. I joined Comic Relief back in January, and I lead on Tampon Tax Fund 4. We've been really fortunate to have a really successful partnership with DCMS, so with the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. We've had 3 grants historically, and we've obviously just launched our 4th grant this year. And the focus is on supporting women and girls who've experienced supporting women and girls who've experienced violence and abuse, but in particular, investing in the buy and for sector. So we are looking at investing in organisations that are led and managed by Black and minoritized, for Black and minoritized women. So we are just in the midst of grant making. We're at the very final stages of grant making, and it's really exciting to have been a part of this process, which I feel has really embraced inclusivity and participation. Those are the key elements of, I guess, grant making that we're really trying to embed here at Comic Relief, and are making a concerted effort to do so. We've had external representation, so sector experts who've supported us alongside design and actual grant making processes. We've actually had devolved decision making at panels, therefore Comic Relief doesn't hold that power around what organisations to invest in, when we've shifted that power balance to really embrace the representation from the sector and to hear their voices. So we're on a journey, is what I would say, and we're far from that destination, but we are really all about hearing how we can and better invest in this sector that we know is under-resourced and underfunded, and to really work better with you all. So I'm not going to take any more time away from our lovely panellists, but I may circle back if there are any questions in particular for me as a representative from Comic Relief here later in the session. I'm going to hand over to Rowan, and Rowan's going to have about 5 minutes just to talk about the work that she does over at the National Lottery Trust. So Rowan, over to you.
Thanks, Rina. I'm going to talk fairly fast in order to get through what I want to talk to you all about. As an overview, we fund we have quite a lot of funding around the women and girls sector. We had the Women and Girls Initiative, which ran from 2016 to 2022, and that was £44.7 million for 62 organisations. I can't give you figures for all the women and girls services that we fund because of the way that our data kind of comes through to us. But I can tell you that in the past 5 years, we've invested £173.9 million into 757 organisations that tackle domestic abuse. It's about £40 million a year that we invest into domestic abuse, and it's about £10 million a year that we invest into sexual violence services. So that gives you some kind of overview. If I was, in terms of what you need to know about us as a funder, we are distributing lottery funding, and it's an ethical duty for us to be available as a funder for everyone in the community. And we know that the pandemic has impacted on some communities much more negatively than others. And what we want to do is we want to help build forward and build better. And what I would say to you is think of women and girls in the lead. So if you were to know whether we are the right funder for you, it's about how do you know that the women and girls that you're working with really want the project, and how have they helped design it? How are they helping redesign it? Give us a lot of evidence about this and show us in detail how you are relating to your community. And in that way, we may be the funder for you. There is a caveat. So some of the learning that we are getting from the Women and Girls Initiative, those 62 projects that we're funding, is that there's a lot of women in emergency situations, in very critical situations that specialist services are working with, and it's not appropriate necessarily at that time for those women to be co-producing services. But still think about your overall organisation in terms of the governance, in terms of the evaluation, and how you're involving women in and those beneficiaries moving forward. So that's some kind of overview about, you know, whether we are the right funder for you. If you don't have the detail, think about going to something like a small grants program, the Awards for All. But if you feel that you're ready to go for the bigger multi-year funding that we do, make sure that you tell us lots of detail about what you're doing, rather than statistics about other views. Give us your views and your plans. My one piece of advice: build a relationship with your local funding team. So when you submit an idea, you've got a local funding officer that will be assigned to you, and they're your critical friends. They're they're working alongside you. It's going to take much longer than you think. There is a string of emails and phone calls that we go through in terms of our process. Even if we say no to you with a first proposal, we may well agree to fund something later down the road. So please persevere and get verbal feedback from your local funding officer, as well as the email, because you will automatically get an email, but you can definitely get verbal feedback as well. That's part of building the relationship. There's also on our website, there's some slightly hidden stuff, which is the grants that we've already funded around women and girls, or the grants that we've funded around domestic abuse, or whatever that your particular specialism is. And there's also an insights page, and the insights page could be very useful. It's a lot of learning that we're gathering. And if you typed in women and girls, or you typed in whatever the theme is that you're working in, and kept the documents kind of total, then you will get a lot of learning that comes through. So in terms of us as an organisation, the bit that I'm excited about is what we're trying to do next. The Women and Girls Initiative is our key legacy, and we have to learn from that. We have a women's staff network in the fund who are funding officers, directors, heads of region, and we are really passionate about addressing gender inequality. It's a real ambition for us that all our funding teams look at our applications with intersectional gendered lenses, and we've got, really, who is involved in the application, where are the decisions coming from? Those are the kind of questions that we're really going to be looking at when an application comes in. Gender is recognised by us as a key inequality in the fund. So alongside disability, LGBTQ+, and racially minoritized communities, gender is also something that we recognise as very key that needs addressing. There's lots of things I want from you in terms of the audience. One of the key things is, how are you getting supported by infrastructure and umbrella organisations? What other capacity do you need in terms of, in terms of your governance, in terms of supporting staff well-being, but also that, that key question, what can we do apart from funding? Because we can get people together. And that's something that, may be very useful in terms of networking or, having some kind of influence for the sector. That's it.
Thank you, Rowan. That was really great to hear from you. I know I wish we could give you some more time. I know it's never enough. But what I would encourage our audience to do is, if there's any points that Rowan mentioned that you'd like to circle back on later in the Q&A session, please use that chat box now. And in the break, we'll have an opportunity just to put together our thoughts and get some responses there. So thank you, Rowan. And next up we have Ihsaan, and Ihsaan is from the Tudor Trust, and he is a grant support officer there. So over to you, Ihsaan.
Hi everyone, really good to be here. I'm Ihsaan. I work at Tudor Trust as the grant support officer, so I'm part of the information team there. I tend to do a lot of work with applicants pre-application, sort of giving them some information by phone or by email, and I also manage a number of grants at Tudor. So a brief introduction to Tudor. We're a generalist funder, and so we don't have specific programs or pots so much. We mainly have one grant application process that anybody who wants to apply to really goes through. So we focus mainly on direct work with marginalised people in the community, and by community we don't necessarily mean the geographical community, although in a lot of cases it can be based on an area or a neighbourhood, but it can also be community of interest. And in a lot of cases I think that applies to women's organisations that apply to us. So and yeah, being a generous funder, we do fund a lot of things. So we'll fund work on mental health, work with asylum seekers and refugees, work on housing and homelessness, work with people in the criminal justice system, and in a lot of cases these can intersect. So for applications from women's organisations, we'll sometimes see applications from women's centres, work on domestic violence or domestic abuse. Sometimes we also fund work on sex work as well, and yeah, and it can be kind of more generic community work. So it could be work on, say, improving skills, improving confidence, that's done by women-led organisations. I suppose a lot of work we prioritise, it tends to be quite long-term and meeting the needs people have in different ways. So usually quite holistic focus is what we're looking for from organisations that apply to us. And because of that, I'd say most of what we do is core funding, because we do have that focus on quite longer term work and quite an ongoing focus. We can fund projects as well, and we can fund capital, but again, we're looking for quite a long term focus, like working with individual people, groups of people over longer term with those. So yeah, as I mentioned, we don't have specific programs when it comes to funding. So the statistics I've got here are according to the coding labels we've put in after we've agreed grants. But so at the moment we have active grants to 56 different organisations that we've coded as women's organisations or girls' organisations. In 2020 to 21, 75 grants were agreed from Tudor to women's organisations. That maybe doesn't give you much of an idea of kind of the kind of scale of what we do compared to other things. So maybe a better number is the amount, which was £2.6 million of funding that we agreed last year, which is about 12% of the total of funding that we agreed, which is an increase, I'm happy to say, from the previous year, which is about 8% of our total going to women's organisations. So I thought it'd be helpful to give a few examples of organisations that we've recently agreed grants to. So one was to a support worker salary for work with homeless and vulnerable people, homeless and vulnerable women specifically in a borough in East London. And another one was for a training programme for South Asian women in a town in Yorkshire. So the reason I wanted to highlight that was because it was quite an unusual one for us to be funding a project that was mainly around employment. But this one, it was quite long term and had quite a holistic focus in that it was as much around confidence building as well as the employability aspect of it. So it was something that was maybe a bit closer within our guidelines, a bit more of a fit, and it's quite community driven as well. So we do mainly fund service delivery, but we are increasingly opening to funding campaigning, and I think that's been reflected in our recent guidelines. And I think a lot of the campaign work, it does have that direct element of really working with people who are able to argue things from their lived experience. I suppose one piece of advice I'd give to people who are applying to us, so in our application questions 3 and 4 about the community you work with, so we ask for the challenges that the community is facing, as well as the strengths and opportunities in those communities. And I think quite similar to what Rowan said, it's a lot of the time it's about really arguing or about speaking from your own experience as well. You know, official statistics can be good, but we're I think really interested in, you know, your experience from your own work, from your own community engagement, from the lived experience of people in your community as well. And yeah, it's really effective, I think, sometimes to include stories or include quotes to kind of give us that kind of personal aspect to bring the application to life a bit. So I think that'd be my top tip. And I think what I'd like to know from the audience here, you know, so I think events like this are really great for kind of breaking down the barriers somewhat between funders and applicants. And I think it's great that we've got a bit more opportunity to do this during the pandemic as people can access these through Zoom. So I suppose I'm interested to know, you know, what people's ideas are on other ways that we can kind of break down those barriers a bit, that we can maybe make ourselves as a funder more accessible to you.
Thanks, Ihsaan. That was really helpful, and especially to hear the statistics and data around your live investments. I think that's really good for the audience to hear from you. So next up, I am going to ask Genevieve, who is here from the Henry Smith charity, to tell us about her role as a grants manager. So over to you, and you've got 5 minutes.
Thanks, Rina. I really appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. My name is Genevieve, and I'm a grants manager at the Henry Smith charity. So as a grants manager, my role is to answer questions from organisations that want to apply to us for funding, and to read applications when they come in, and then also to have meetings with organisations that are interested in applying to us and are in the kind of assessment process. And I also manage a portfolio of live grants as well. So that's kind of, I sort of look after the whole process. Henry Smith is the current annual grants budget of about £28 million, and we've got 2 main grants programmes. One's called Improving Lives and one's called Strengthening Communities, and they're both open programmes with no deadlines. And I think, so we're not a specialist funder, so we fund in both these programmes across a really wide range of groups and needs and issues. So it could be youth work or disability, criminal justice, older people, LGBTQ+, migration, people from racially minoritized communities. That's just to name a few. We have more than that. So we're what we would call a generalist funder. I know that's kind of like an industry term, but that's what that means, is that there's no kind of specific focus. We don't have kind of particular pots for particular things. So how do we support women's organisations? Women's organisations are really welcome to apply to us. I want to say that up front. Currently, we have grants totaling around about £4 million, which are committed to organisations specifically supporting women. It's a bit of a guesstimate because, similarly, like the coding, it's a bit tricky to know, but I'd say it's around £4 million. Most of those grants sit within our Improving Lives programme, and I'd suggest that for most people in this room today, Improving Lives is going to be the best bet for you, I would say, because it's designed to support organisations who work within a specific community of interest, or around a specific set of needs. So if you're working with women or on a specific issue such as trauma, mental health, or it could be employability, it could be sexual violence, if you're focused on a specific need and issue or a community of interest, that's what Improving Lives is designed for. So I would suggest, if you're looking to apply to us, then I'd look at that programme first. Strengthening Communities is less likely to be a good fit for you, I would say. So there's a huge diversity of work that is delivered by the women's organisations that we are funding, and mostly Improving Lives. Some are supporting women who've been in the criminal justice system. Some are focusing on parenting support. Some are on mental health. Some are on some people are gender-based violence specialists. And some organisations are supporting women specifically from racially minoritized communities. So there's a huge diversity there. And it's important to note that for many organisations, whilst the focus might be on a specific issue. So they might be coming to us, for example, for an employability project, that in practice they work holistically. So they will be recognising that the trauma and complex needs people experience, sit within an individual that they're looking to support. And in response, they're offering a holistic wraparound one-stop shop service that offers consistency and safety. And that provision of holistic support is something that we particularly value and look for in applications that we get. And we know that the specialist women's sector is often very well placed to provide that kind of support. That is highly tailored. Also, picking up on what Ihsaan said, like Tudor Trust, we prioritise work that supports people longer term. So we want, often this goes with offering holistic support, and the specialist women's sector is great at doing this. It's open-ended support. People can be in that service as long as they need, progress through it, and relationships are at the core. Boundaried supportive relationships are at the core of that work. That's the kind of thing we're usually looking at. And we're always focused on service delivery. We don't fund any work that is around campaigning or attitudinal change. Whilst that work is obviously incredibly valuable and very much needed, it is not the focus for our funding. So we're only looking at work that is directly supporting individuals on the ground. That's our priority. And if your organisation does a mixture of the two things, then it's a good idea to have a chat with us about how you sort of structure a project so that it just looks at the service delivery and we don't end up looking at any of the kind of advocacy or campaigning work. Now, this gets a bit more complicated when I say that, to echo something Rowan said, we also value seeing organisations involving women with lived experience in designing services, having a voice in how organisations structure themselves and what the strategic aims are. So that's also something that's important to us and we look to see, and that we don't consider that to be campaigning or awareness raising or attitudinal change work. So building in that involvement is really important for us, and we do look for it in all the applications that we get. We look for that from everybody. So that would encompass also organisations that are women specific. So what should you do if you feel you want to apply to us? We've got a website, best place to start, an online application process, but we really welcome phone calls as well. So at the moment, whilst we're all working at home still, I'm still at home, you can see my background. We have a system where you have to put in a request for a chat, basically. So on the website, you can ask for a phone call, and then a grants manager, someone like me, will give you a call back, usually within like 24 hours. And then you can chat through what your kind of questions are. So, if it's about how to interpret the guidelines, or this bit of our work looks like it fits, but this bit doesn't fit, how do we structure that? We can totally have a conversation about any of that stuff. So we really welcome you. Please, we really welcome you calling us and chatting through anything you're not sure about. We'd be really happy to speak to you. We'd much rather that you did that and checked in, because we know it takes a really long time to write an application. It's really labour intensive. So we, much rather you felt that you were kind of supported to do that in a way that makes sense for you, or if it's not a right fit, that to move on to the next funder. So I hope that's helpful, and I'm looking forward to hearing what questions you have for us. I know that sometimes we're a really old private charitable trust, so kind of less publicly accountable, I guess, than some of the other people kind of on this panel. And I know that there can be a kind of an air of mystique around organisations like ours, and the power dynamics are not very helpful. So what I really want to kind of sort of express is that you are welcome, and we do want to hear from you. And I'd love to hear your questions in the chat. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Genevieve. And I feel like you may have opened the floodgates with putting it out there that the organisation takes these requests for callback. So I can see a few comments already in the chat box. It may be new information to people in the audience, but it's a really great service that you provide there, Henry Smith. So I think people may be taking you up on that offer from what I can read in the chat box. So next up, we have Jack. And Jack is a grants officer over at the Clothworkers Foundation. And Jack, we're going to give you 5 minutes to tell us a bit about the work that you do.
Okay, thanks very much, Rina. I'm going to get straight into it, and I'm going to start by giving you a bit of a brief overview of what we do at Clothworkers Foundation. I'm sure some of you are familiar with us, but some of you maybe less so. So we're a UK-wide funder. So we cover England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. We fund charities and registered not-for-profit companies. And probably the thing that sets us apart from most funders is through our open grants programme, we only cover capital expenditure. So we define that as buildings, vehicles and equipment. And to give you a bit of an idea of the scale of what we do, through our open grants programme, we tend to give away about £6 or £7 million a year. We fund projects working in 9 different programme areas. So they are alcohol and substance misuse, disadvantaged minority communities, disadvantaged young people, domestic and sexual abuse, homelessness, older people, people with disabilities, prisoners and ex-offenders, and visual impairment. And the way we define eligibility is if 50% or more of your beneficiaries fall into one or more of those categories, then you would be eligible to apply. So in terms of the context of what we're here to talk about today, to use that word again, we are a generalist funder. And none of those programme areas that I've just mentioned were established specifically to target women's organisations. However, in practice, we regularly support women's organisations across the majority, if not all, of those programme areas. So, for example, if you're working with young girls, you may fit with disadvantaged young people. You might be a Muslim women's or LGBT women's organisation, in which case you might fit with disadvantaged minority communities. You might be a women's addiction support service, in which case you'd fit under alcohol and substance misuse, and et cetera, et cetera. So there's plenty of scope for women's organisations to apply. And the one programme area that does predominantly support women's organisations, as you may expect, is domestic and sexual abuse. And within those areas, we do have some that are more popular than others. I think the 2 most popular tend to be people with disabilities and disadvantaged young people. And certainly domestic and sexual abuse is one of those programme areas that we tend to receive less applications for. Could be for a number of reasons, perhaps not as many charities operate in that space as, for example, disability, the fact that we've probably done limited outreach with specifically with women's organisations. Hopefully being here today will change that a bit. And also possibly the fact that we're a capital only funder limits the opportunities that organisations have to apply to us. But whatever the reason is, it's something that we're really conscious of as an organisation. And it is a priority, particularly that domestic and sexual abuse programme area, but women's organisations in general, it really is a priority for our trustees. Because we receive a shortage of applications in that area compared to some other more popular areas, we do tend to fund more significant contributions to organisations that are working in that area compared to, for example, people with disabilities or disadvantaged young people, just because we recognise that it's an area that's underfunded in comparison to some others. So I've talked about our 9 programme areas and the fact that we only fund capital expenditure. And I think for most of the organisations here today who may be thinking of applying, that all of that information that I've been through will apply to you. However, I do want to quickly just talk about some of the stuff that we've been doing outside of our kind of day-to-day grants programmes and our open grants programmes, which we call our proactive grant making. So firstly, we focused our phase 2 of our coronavirus response on communities experiencing racial inequality and also initiatives supporting victims and survivors of domestic abuse. As part of that, we actually awarded a significant grant to Rosa, our host today, and they will then be distributing the funds to other organisations which are working with survivors of domestic and sexual abuse as they see fit. In 2020, we also awarded a large grant to the Women in Safe Homes, or WISH programme, which was developed in response to the lack of accommodation for homeless women, women that have been involved in the criminal justice system and domestic abuse as well. We've also partnered with Comic Relief and Esme Fairbairn as part of their Tech v Abuse funding programme, which supported organisations to improve the safety of people affected by domestic abuse through developing kind of digital solutions. So hopefully through the detail I've given on our proactive work and also the programme areas, you can see that, not only is it a priority for us for our proactive work, but that there's plenty of scope to apply to us through a number of different programme areas, even though none of them specifically target women's organisations. In terms of my top tip, I think it's going to be the same as some others that have been given. My first one would always be to reach out to us. I'm sure there's a lot of people here today that already think that it may be worth applying to us. And if that's the case, then definitely get in touch, go on our website, perhaps ask a question later. I think as well, I would say, and this may seem counterintuitive, but if, like I say, if you've been listening to me and you think, oh, that sounds like it could well fit with our organisation, don't overthink it. I may be biased, but I really think that, you know, in previous jobs and on previous programmes I've worked on, I think our criteria is relatively simple. So if you're sat there, you're a registered charity or not-for-profit company, you're working in one or more of those programme areas, and you have the need for a capital item, so some building work, a vehicle, or some equipment, then the chances are you're going to be in a really good position to apply to us. So if you think you fit that description, what I'll do is I'm happy to pop my email in the chat box. Definitely do a little bit more research, go on our website, get in touch with me, ask a question later. And, you know, we really want to encourage people to apply, and we'd be happy to help.
Thank you so much, Jack. I think you've just really been able to dissect the way that funders often work in a really easy and concise manner. So that was really helpful for me. And I'm sure it would have been for the audience members as well. So our very last and final speaker, last but not least, but I'd want to welcome on now Elizabeth Myers. And Elizabeth works at the Department of Culture, Media and Sport. She's a senior policy and grant manager there. And Elizabeth, I hope you're going to tell us a bit about Tampon Tax Fund.
I am, definitely. Thank you. So, hi everyone, lovely to be here, and it's been great to listen to the rest of the panel as well. I think I've made lots of notes and expect follow-ups from me to the panel too. So thank you for sharing, everyone. I think in the spirit of transparency, we're all learning about each other at the same time as the audience is learning about us too. So as you mentioned, Rina, so the tampon tax is administered through the Department of Digital Culture, Media and Sport, but my team sits within the Office for Civil Society and Youth. As a brief introduction to the Tampon Tax Fund, it's been around since 2015. This is the final round of the Tampon Tax Fund. The tampon tax has ended, which is great news. We're open at the moment, so we have deadlines, and we are currently open for applications for the final round. And the deadline is the 4th of July, so a couple more weeks there. The aims of the fund are specialist, so it's to improve the lives of women and girls being able to live safely, so ending violence against women and girls, to move towards employment and financial independence, and some of the softer, more really powerful outcomes, to find friendships and support from peers, and to manage mental health. We are a project funder. One of the things that might be slightly different from us as a funder, and Rina, you touched on this earlier on, is that we fund a mix of direct projects and also make grants to other funders who are specialists who also make onward grants. So Rina, you'd mentioned we fund Comic Relief and Rosa then to make onward grants to grantees. So we fund specialist services to make specialist grants to women and girls. But we do kind of, at the minute, our portfolio is around 50-50, the amount that we manage directly within the Office of Civil Society and Youth, and the amount that goes out and is funded through specialist funders. The size of the fund, so for this final round, we will be giving out 11.25 million. It's actually slightly smaller than it's been in previous years, and that's because the tax has ended, and it represents 9 months rather than 12 months of the VAT that was generated on sanitary products. So thank goodness that's ended, but it does mean that it's a smaller fund this year, which is challenging. The threshold for application, so our minimum amount is £350,000 for an award, which is really high when you look at other funders, and that's because many organisations are coming on to us to distribute to other projects. So the length of grant for the final round as well is 12 to 18 months. So actually, I think a top tip and one thing to consider is it sensible to apply directly to us for funding, or would it make more sense to apply for a smaller, more reasonable amount of money through one of our onward grantees? So I think that's a conversation that you can have with us. We're a team of 2, so I'm not going to give out just my email address, but we do have one which is ttf@dcms.gov.uk, and once I stop presenting, I can put that in the chat box. you can ask us that question and we can really have that conversation about, does it make more sense to apply to us directly or to go through one of our onward grantees? Thinking about one piece of advice, for me, it would be especially for the final round of funding, think about the legacy of the project that you want to deliver. How will it last beyond the lifetime of the project that you want to deliver? So how are you sharing the learning that you've got wider than your current network and current beneficiary group? How could you use maybe digital solutions and building that into your project ask to us to make sure that we can kind of amplify the learning that you've got from your project wider to more women and girls? And what would I like to learn from you? Actually, Rowan, when you were speaking, it was like really chiming with me. One of the things I'm here to do is, recognise that, yes, this is the last round of the Tampon Tax Fund, but what else can we be giving to you around capacity building support, around women's leadership support? What can we do that is in addition to the funds that we've got? Can we bring people together? Can we sort of fund that kind of work as well? So how can we be more useful to help build capacity in the sector as well? Thank you so much, Rina. That's it for me.
Thanks, Elizabeth. It was really great to hear about the Live Open grant, the final fund, and I'm sure you may get some more questions about the fund later on in our session for Q&A. So thanks, Elizabeth. What we're going to do now is I'm just going to sum up and then lead us into a bit of a 5-minute break before we come back and really put ourselves forward for those Q&As that you may have put forward in the chat box. I think hearing from all of the panelists today, what I feel like is there is a commitment from all of the organisations that we represent to really invest in organisations like yourselves that are all about improving the lives of women and girls, and specifically looking at women and girls who may be facing inequality, who may be facing disadvantage or vulnerability. There's a real commitment within all of the organisations that we represent. And for me, I think one of the things that really stood out in when you were all speaking was that need to hear about the actual story of your organisation and the impact that you can have on the beneficiary group that you're proposing within, a proposal or a project to be funded. That's something that I would definitely say, having just gone through the grant making process for the Tampon Tax Fund 4 at Comic Relief. What we really want to see is that real life story. What's unique, what's so specialist about the organisation that you represent and the work that you do, because we know that you do incredible work to support women and girls. So thank you everyone for giving us a really brief overview about the amazing work that you do within your respective organisations. I know that we're going to come back for some question and answers. So Anna, am I okay to say we're going to break for 5 minutes? Yeah, and come back online to hopefully answer those questions that you posted. Thanks everyone. We'll join you again in a couple of minutes. Anna, how did we go with the questions? I think you're on mute.
Sorry, Rina. I've just collected them from the Q&A box and I'll send them to you now.
Okay.
I think we can go ahead without Elizabeth now. So thanks everyone, and I hope you managed to get a cup of tea during our break. We were just reading through all the questions quickly and sort of sorting through them. So I'll hand back to Rina to chair the discussion. Thanks, Rina. Rina's got rather a lot of questions to read through.
I'm working off dual screens and my cursor just disappeared on me for a second. Apologies, everyone. I hope you had a second to stretch your legs. In that break, like Anna was saying, we've had a chance to look at some of the questions that have been put forward to our panelists. And so now we've got about 20 minutes to really work through some of these questions and to be able to let you hear from the panelist in response to these questions. So I thought it may be useful if I start with one of them first, Anna, which spoke to me in terms of the work that we're doing at Comic Relief. So there was a question put forward around investment in by and for organisations, so investing in Black and minoritized organisations, or BAME organisations. And what I just wanted to say was I work at Comic Relief, and one of the investments that we are channeling and putting concerted effort in is funding organisations representing communities that may be racially minoritized. So we have a number of programs that we've recently launched or are currently live, and they're all about, I guess, investing in by and for organisations. So I spoke a little bit about the Tampon Tax Fund 4 that we launched earlier on in this year, and how that's all about investing in women and girls, violence against women and girls service provision, essentially, but for Black and minoritized women. So we are looking at organisations who are led and managed by Black and minoritized women, offering services to Black and minoritized women. And during our assessment process, which includes, obviously, as you know, you submit your application, we then go into a shortlisting process and then an assessment process. We do look into the details of whether your organisation represents that community that you're speaking to in your proposal and the project that you really want funded. So that's just one of the programs that we have here at Comic Relief. Another one that you may have heard of is the Global Majority Fund, which is in partnership with, I'm just reading, the Clothworkers Foundation and the National Emergencies Trust, which is all about investing in intermediary partners who then invest in the communities who may be racially minoritized. And just one that we've actually released earlier this week, so I think it was actually yesterday we launched, was in partnership with the Ministry of Justice. It's all about supporting survivors of domestic violence and sexual violence, and one of the categories under which you can apply for, again, is working with communities who may represent Black and minoritized communities there. So I just wanted to I thought that spoke to me quite well, in that we have got a number of I guess programs at the moment which are all about investing in the buy and for sector. So it seems like maybe you felt there was some reluctance, but what I would say is, from Comic Relief's point of view, we are trying to address this specifically because we know that this sector, in particular, this part of the sector, has been underfunded and under-resourced. So there's a huge need to really channel resources, and I hope some of these funding opportunities that I spoke to could maybe be an opportunity for you as an organisation to apply under. So yeah, that was one of the first questions that we had. I don't know if any of our panelists wanted to add anything there that I've spoken about in relation to the work that they're doing in the organisations you sit within. Yeah, okay, I've got Rowan's hand up. Rowan, do you just want to add to that?
Yeah, just that by and for led organisations are also, we see that as really important in terms of our kind of overall approach around people in the lead. So in terms of women and girls in the lead, the people who are being most impacted by whatever it is you're trying to address, we want them involved in the organisation as well. So that would fit very well with our approach. The other thing is that this may not be that interesting to other people, but we have just changed the way we're capturing data, which includes having by and for in our kind of initial application. Is that something that you would identify as? And, you know, and gender is in there as well. So we will start getting much clearer data about how many of the organisations we fund are by and for led organisations, which I think is great.
Yeah, just to add something, just in a more general sense, I think looking for that user-led approach is really one of the key elements that we take into account with any assessment we do. So, you know, in an ideal world, if the organisation is led by the people, by the communities that it serves, or at the very least, we'd want to see that, you know, those communities have a really strong hand in directing what they do and influencing the provision of services and that kind of thing. So just to echo Rowan's thoughts really, but in a general sense with, you know, the user-led approach.
Thank you both. That was helpful. I had a question here about partnerships and proposals which may include a partnership of a generalist organisation and a specialist organisation working together. And I just wanted to see who may be able to speak to that. And there was a comment around often the specialist organisations maybe not really benefiting from that partnership. And if you've got any thoughts or comments around that. I know at Comic Relief we certainly encourage partnership proposals, and there's a conversation to be had between the lead applicant and between the partners that may be applying as well under that fund. But I think finding mutual purpose is key, is what I would say, that all partners that may enter into a partnership or maybe considering establish what that mutual purpose is throughout the life course of the project that they're proposing. Does anyone else want to add to I guess how you may fund organisations that are putting forward partnership proposals? Rowan, I can see you nodding. Yeah, great.
We do have a partnership strand of specific funding for partnerships. We recognise partnerships take a long time, so we can also do development funding for the partnership. We would expect a memorandum of understanding to be there before we release money, which sometimes can protect a specialist organisation if they're part of a bigger generalist, you know, partnership, as it were. If we really love specialist organisations, it's something that, you know, we're passionate about, but we also see that sometimes it can have a bigger reach if they work with a generalist organisation. But we would not want to see a generalist using a specialist organisation just to get the funding, and we would be investigating that. Well, not investigating, that sounds a bit too, but we would definitely be wanting to have conversations about that. So it's a really important one.
Thanks, Rowan. I can see Anna and Elizabeth both want to comment as well.
I'll be very quick. I just wanted to say that this issue has been fed back to us by organisations that we're funding. We don't fund a huge number of partnerships, but we sort of know it's an issue for the sector, and particularly for small specialist organisations feeling, you know, we all know there's not enough funding, and that women's organisations are often competing with each other for funding, and that specialist organisations can be felt, sometimes kind of feel used in applications for funding. So we're just trialling at the moment, doing some kind of capacity building work with a small group of women's organisations to help them think about how they build partnerships in a way that really benefits them. So we're just trialing that at the moment, but I think something for us to reflect on as funders is how can we support the organisations that we fund to build useful partnerships, and by useful I mean useful for them, not useful for us.
I was going to come in and just make sure it's clear that the Tampon Tax Fund does welcome applications from partnerships, consortiums, but actually my reflection was, when I'd asked what I wanted to hear about, it was how can we help build capacity? And this seems like one of those areas where maybe as a partnership funder, like we should be thinking about how we support organisations to build really effective partnerships that are sustainable. So it was just kind of a everyday, you know, me making notes of like, this seems like an area that I hadn't been particularly aware of. So I've just learned something. So thank you very much for sharing. But we do welcome applications from partnerships. Absolutely.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And one thing I might just add in relation to Tampon Tax Fund 4 over here at Comic Relief, we're really close to announcing our successful applicants, but I can say half of the applications that have been recommended for funding investment actually are representing partnership proposals. So half represent organisations that have just put in a proposal individually, but half are. So we try and build a portfolio that's going to represent lots of different kind of qualities of women's organisations in the sector that we're trying to work within as much as possible. Okay, so we have some questions about the Tampon Tax Fund, Elizabeth, and I wonder if it's maybe useful just to touch on one or two of them at the moment whilst they're coming through, and then I think there probably will be some emails coming through to the mailbox over at Tampon Tax Fund as a follow-up. But we had two questions, which the first one was, can groups who receive funding in the first round, or maybe in the second round or third, apply for continuation funding? And also, how do smaller groups or smaller organisations, sorry, find out about which specialist funders that you're going to be, I guess, investing in, who can then be able to access the fund?
So I'll start with the continuation funding, and like many of the funders around the table, we aren't expecting anyone to be recreating the wheel and starting from a brand new project, but really that kind of evidence of learning and significant development. So what has worked and why you're doing more of it, and what hasn't worked and what you've dropped and why. So that kind of evidence that's been used from a previous project built into the development of a new project. So yes, there is continuation funding, but we will be looking for kind of significant development based on the learning that's already been invested in through the project. And thinking then about how you would know who has received onward grantees. So we're looking to make our announcement of who has been successful in mid-October. And that will be, you know, we'll be pushing out to the same networks as we've been able to get so far. The announcement that the fund was open, maybe it didn't go wide enough, but we'll be using this network, you know, like everywhere we can to push that message out of who has been successful. And again, if you want to, you can always check in gov.uk or come straight to the TTF mailbox to ask. I'd be happy to respond, but we will be announcing that in the middle of October.
Thanks, Elizabeth. Really good to know about those timeframes. So we had another question, but also paired with a comment, I guess, around core funding. And this is something that we all probably get asked time and time again. But there seems to be a theme maybe in the organisations that we represent for really investing in project work specifically. And the question that's been put forward is, where do organisations like those seated here in our audience today go for actual core funding? And do you have any tips around how they can access core funding, how they can build in that multi-year core funding to build their capacity around fundraising, for example, was a point that they had. Anyone want to answer or try to answer that?
Yes.
Ihsaan, yeah, and maybe Genevieve after.
Yeah. So with Tudor, yeah, as I said before, most of our funding is core funding. It's perhaps even a bit more flexible if you're a charity, in that we're doing a bit more unrestricted funding than we used to. So having less, you know, kind of less of a kind of core need for less of a requirement to spend the funding on a certain thing. And even if you are, say, a company who's applying to us, we can still do core funding where there's a clear charitable purpose to the work you're doing. I think in terms of thinking on how to you know, how to use your core funding, it's maybe thinking about, you know, whether you can have additional people maybe who are able to work on a certain aspect, you know, if it could be fundraising that you need a bit more capacity for. But I suppose another thing as well is that if you're applying to us, you don't necessarily need to have it all worked out. So if you do get a fund, you know, we can do a bit of work with you on how you were going to spend your core funding, you know, in the year after you get your funding or in later years, and we can also agree on some additional funding if we think, you know, you could do a bit of assistance for that. So we can do, say, development grants for a consultant who can come and work with you to speak about how that funding might be used. So So yeah, I suppose when you do apply to Tudor, if you get past the first stage, there's a bit of an ongoing conversation with us, as part of the application, but that can keep going on, once the grant's been made.
Thanks, Ihsaan. That's really helpful. Genevieve, did you want to add?
Sure. We also fund core costs. They're not unrestricted, as in you couldn't spend the money on anything. If you wanted to pay every staff member, I don't know, a pet giraffe or something, you can't do that. But anything that is related to the the sort of core service delivery is what we mean by kind of core costs, and that can be fundraising. It can be obviously keeping the lights on, running the photocopier, giving people laptops, whatever it needs to be. Our Improving Lives program, which I referenced earlier, the application is kind of slightly geared toward asking for project funding. But it is possible, but you can apply under that program for running costs, for core costs. It's just perfectly eligible to do so. It's a slightly harder ask in that you've kind of got to say more in the same amount of sort of word count space as someone who's just applying for a project, but it is doable. And I think if you're thinking of doing it, then give us a call. The other thing I would say is that if you are thinking of applying for running costs, you need to consider that if we're funding across your whole organisation, everything you do has to fit in our guidelines. So that point I made earlier about us not funding campaigning and awareness raising work. If an element of your work is that, then we're going to have a problem with funding you for core costs. I mean, if it's a tiny amount, like sort of 2% or something, we probably have a conversation about it. But if it's a good chunk of your work, then you are better off coming to us for project costs, because it excises that part that is not eligible. So that's the kind of stuff you can have you can kind of give us a call to kind of chat through where you might sit. But broadly speaking, yes, we fund core costs, running costs. We appreciate that you need that stuff in order to be able to actually run your organisation and therefore run your project. So without all that, the work doesn't happen. We know that. And also just to say, on top of that, with project costs, we do look for full cost recovery. I know, I'd hope that at this day and age you wouldn't have to say this, but I think some funders still don't fund full cost recovery. We do fund full cost recovery. So if you're putting in for a project, please add in the cost of the management and the fundraising on the other things on top that are needed to make sure that that project fully functions and contributes to your overall core costs. I hope that makes sense.
Thanks, Genevieve. That's really, really useful to highlight. In relation to full cost recovery, I often find that when we were going through our assessment phase, that organisations hadn't actually given us their full cost recovery in their budget, and then we kind of circle back and have a conversation. So I think it's really useful to hear that from you as well. I know we've only got a few more minutes left, so I may try and finish up on one final question that I can see here, which really puts a bit of a spotlight on us as representatives from organisations that fund organisations like yourself in the audience. There is a question about how the sector can actually influence the programmes that we put together and the priorities of funding that we may have within our respective organisations. And I might just start off by adding a little bit about what we do at Comic Relief and then handing over to anyone else before we finish up. But hearing from the sector is incredibly important for us throughout the life cycle of a programme and in between as well. And one of the things that we've done within Tampon Tax Fund, for example, is bring together the portfolio at regular points throughout the course of the projects that we've invested in, to have conversations about how the work is kind of coming along, what the sector is experiencing, and how we may need to adjust and be flexible as a funder as well in turn, which then informs us about any future programs that we may be hosting. So what I would want to really encourage is if you are working in partnership with us currently, under a live project, to have an open dialogue. And I'd really just want to say we are aiming to be incredibly relational. I know it's really tricky at the moment because everything is virtual and everything is online, and there's really limited ability to have networking opportunities in person. But I don't want to see that as a barrier, and I really want to encourage those conversations and dialogue. So where we can, we bring people together that we've invested in organisations to hear from them in a regular way, so we can keep up with the learning as much as possible. So anyone on our panel? Anna,
yeah,
it'd be great to hear from you.
I think there's a huge need for the women's sector to influence funders, and each funder has different channels through which you can do that. So Rina, you talked a little bit about Comic Relief, and the larger funders, National Lottery, etc., will have their own kind of complex consultation processes, whereas for others of us, it might be more about individual conversations. And of course, I think my impression is that the lottery, welcome lots of those individual conversations as well. I think my main piece of advice is to keep being really loud about it. So, you know, lots and lots of people have talked about the need for core costs, and I think the funding sector is hearing that, and like a very big slow tank, it's slowly moving and realizing that project funding actually can sometimes really not be what organizations need. They need longer term core funding, and they need trust. And I think slowly we're getting there, and you just have to keep telling funders these things and also gathering the evidence to back that up. So I suppose from Rose's point of view, we feel very strongly that women's organisations absolutely know what they're doing. They're doing fantastic work, and they need our trust and our funding to keep doing it. But different funders need different evidence of that. So if you can evidence why the work of your whole organisation is working, so kind of, you know, being able to prove that what you're doing works, so kind of collecting evidence of outcomes, that helps you make that case. I'm veering slightly into the last question around core costs, but I think it's about gathering some evidence to make your case and then making it really loudly. And I know that's exhausting and you're all doing all sorts of other things at the same time, but shouting about it helps because funders are trying to listen.
Thanks, Anna. Would anyone else like to add? Thanks, Rowan.
One of the things that we have done after the Women and Girls Initiative, which had a lot of learning attached to it, is we started these roundtable events. So this is getting funders, commissioners and providers, you know, women and girls specialists together. Because it came from the women and girls sector that they wanted to build more trusted relationships with funders and commissioners, and then the pandemic hit. And so you end up with a situation where we've got these online ones, which I think are great, but we are really looking forward to getting those people in a room together on a local basis. And I really hope that's something that we will be able to do. And I think the other point for me is funders need to, we need to listen to each other as well, because Rosa is going to have a whole load of information from the sector that they are really trusted by, and Comic Relief will have another group of sectors. So I mean, so I think, and same with all of these funders. So the more we can work together, the more we hear about the sector as a whole, which I think is, I think works better than just whoever we're trusted by or whoever we get, you know, we fund. So.
That's really important, Rowan, to just remind ourselves of how we need to be in continuous conversations with each other and not work against each other in a competitive way. We're all here to invest in women and girls and really to invest in organisations that support women and girls. So we've got common purpose here, and we want to really try and build a partnership between us. So I know for me, I know Elizabeth, I know Rowan, I know Anna, you know, since I've joined Comic Relief, but I've hopefully forged a new relationship here with Genevieve, Ihsaan and Jack, who I haven't met previously or come across. So it's been great for me to hopefully start a bit of a relationship and a connection with some new representatives within other organisations in the funding community. So we've just gone slightly over 12:45, but I do need to bring the session to a close. I'd really like to thank Rosa for hosting this session today, which is all about meeting our funders in the funding community. It's really important that we continue to have a space to have a conversation about how we invest in women's organisations to improve the lives of women and girls. And to all of our panelists, thank you so much for taking the time to do the prep for this session, for speaking so eloquently about the work that you do within your respective organisations. And it's often a thankless task. I know grant making, grant management is incredibly challenging at the best of times, and especially over the last year. To our audience, those of you that work in the women's sector, supporting women and girls, thank you for your tireless work. I'll reiterate again, I know that the sector is underfunded, I know it's under-resourced, and we continue to stand here together to be able to ensure the resources are put into this sector. So that's a commitment certainly that I think we're all on board with. The Q&As today have been really thought-provoking and really challenging in a positive way for us. I think it's hopefully good to hear from us as human beings, as relational individuals, and approachable individuals. I'd really encourage you all that you've got contact details from various panelists who are open to hearing from you offline. So please take that offer up, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the ROSA sessions that are lined up over the course of today and tomorrow. And Anna, thanks for all your support today on this session. It's been really, really great to be a part of this. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you so much. And we'll see you all at the next session.